Hi, welcome to How to Make Lasagna. Uh, so we're going to wait here for a few minutes and we've got a couple minutes, so we're going to wait for people to log on so that they can see what's going on. Um, the lasagna that we're making today starts with the recipe for the spaghetti sauce that we made yesterday. And just a recap of yesterday's spaghetti sauce: we took fresh tomatoes, zucchini, um, onions, garlic, oregano, basil, and put that together to make this spaghetti sauce, which, if you see the pictures from yesterday, kind of was a little chunky. This, on the other hand, once we've pureed it from yesterday, comes out to be a very smooth spaghetti sauce, kind of like what you're used to seeing that comes in jars. Um, Hopefully you'll enjoy that. I'm actually going to kill the light above because I have a feeling that's going to be in people's eyes. So let's see if that works. Yeah, that makes a huge difference, and you can still see me. Um, so we're going to start with the spaghetti sauce that we made yesterday. Um, on here, that spaghetti sauce is then going to be the basis of what we use to make lasagna. Um, so to start with, the biggest thing that we have when it comes to making lasagna is the prep. The prep is actually takes the longest and is the hardest part to do. Couple of things you can do. One, I wanted to point out when we start that everything that you see here is all from Pampered Chef except for my lasagna pans. These I actually got from the Costco in um, here in Mexico. They come in 3 sizes, which I absolutely love. You can do this recipe is so easy to do that you can do it in single serving pan sizes that I have. This is the 2 serving size pan that I have. And then, of course, we have a nice big family size pan. And I'll show you how to make all of these. But that way, if you want to and you have a bunch of single size servings that you want to make, you can do it just as easily as the other sizes. You can then put them in the freezer. You can buy aluminum single size pans that are about this size that you can make several of these and then freeze them, and especially if you're at home, and then you can just stick them in the oven to heat up afterwards. So that has its advantages for these 3 different sizes, and I'll show you how you can go about making them. It's the same basic recipe for all of them. Again, we talked about the biggest part of this is the preparation, slicing up the vegetables. So the vegetables we're going to be using are green zucchini, yellow squash, um, mushrooms. I have here both cottage cheese and we have ricotta cheese. The difference between the ricotta cheese and that cottage cheese is kind of a thickness variation, which you can see here. The ricotta cheese is a little bit more thicker than the cottage cheese kind of thing. So in order to make the cottage cheese into more of a ricotta cheese thickness, we will be mixing an egg in with the cottage cheese. The cost is huge. The cottage cheese actually cost a third of what expensive cottage cheese is. So if you're trying to save money, definitely go with the cottage cheese. The taste, there's a little bit different taste, but not really a whole lot. Not that you would notice doing that. We'll use a little bit of bell pepper. Now I'm going to do two sets of lasagnas here. We're going to do a vegetarian set, and we're going to do um, a meat version of this as well. So we need to take these. So we're going to take and start with heating up the ground beef on the meat version. And of course my stove doesn't want to start. Hold on, I will be right back. In this pan, we have a pound of ground beef and a half a pound of Italian sausage. It actually is the kind that comes in the casing. You can buy any kind of Italian spicy sausage, and that'll work in your pan. So you want to start with that. Alexa, stop. And you want to start with that. Heat that on low. We're going to add some onion to that while that heats up. Yesterday, I had a request on how to cut up onions. I did a little trick with the onions yesterday, and so I had a friend of mine who was watching ask me how to do this trick. And so I'm going to show you how to cut up an onion and chop it up really simply. So the first thing we do is we take and you want to cut the bottom off the onion like this. Give it kind of a flat surface, but it also makes it very easy to peel once you've done that. And then you can just peel the outer layer of the onion off once you've done that. I use purple onions. I like the contrast, especially after it cooks. I love the flavor that it gives with the purple onion. It's a lot more flavorful, but it also gives a very, very beautiful kind of purple color to your food, as well as a white contrast. Even once you've cooked the purple onions, you still kind of get a little bit of a purple. I try and cook with a lot of different colors. You'll find that your food is a little bit more appetizing when you cook with colors. So I try and make my food as colorful as possible. So that trick again that we were doing with the onion is you cut off the bottom, you peel it, and then once you have that and you have it as a flat surface, it's easier to work with. Simply take your knife and actually score into it as if you were scoring, let's say, a pinwheel. And so you're making just kind of cuts down it like this all the way in. So the advantage of scoring all the way down is, one, you have it on a stable surface that you're working with. So you're not trying to work with something that's unstable. And you can just cut into your onion like this in these kind of round circles here. Hi, Deborah. So welcome. I'll do a quick recap of what we've done so far. So as I pointed out, the biggest thing to making lasagna is actually the prep of the lasagna. It's taking the time to cut up the vegetables. The zucchini, you can either cut the zucchini and the yellow squash into really nice, precise little circles, or I have this wonderful shredder that I love because it's very stable. I can set it down on the counter. And then when I use it, I just run it across this little blade here, and it cuts these really, really nice, very fine, very nice cuts of, not exactly perfect, but it makes it go very quickly because you can get through a zucchini or squash very quickly. It saves on your hand, not likely to cut it, and it cuts nice little semicircles when you do that. So I love this shredder because it does have that cutting blade on the side, and it's stable. I can set it on the counter. I'm not likely to cut myself with, which is huge, as opposed to cutting it like that. We have the meat in this pan over here. As you can see, we've got a pound of ground beef and a pound of sausage. and that's just heating up right this minute. We'll mix that up and cut that up. So what we've done is we've gone through and we've cut the bottom off of our onion. We've peeled that. We've scored it so it's kind of in a pinwheel type fashion. So this way, when we go to cut this, like this, it just literally already falls into nice little pieces. We're not having to sit there and chop and chop and chop to get those same little nice pieces that we would. And it's much more, it's easier to do it that way. If you want to cut them into finer pieces at that point, you can, but at this point you see that it's much more. The other way that people sometimes will cut this is just going across it this way. You're less likely also to cut yourself that way if you cut it that way. But once you've scored into those little pinwheels, cutting it down, you cut much smaller little pieces, and you don't have to do all the chopping that you normally would have to do to get those kind of really fine little pieces that you're looking for when cutting up the onions. With your onions cut, you want to put that in with the ground beef that you have cooking, the ground beef and or sausage. So you just stick, I'm only putting in about a cupful of those onions, but I wanted to show you how to cut those up so that you knew. In this other pan I have, we're going to do the vegetarian one. And so in substitution of the ground beef and sausage in the other pan, we're going to go ahead and do, put in a quarter cup of olive oil into that pan. We're going to use mushrooms instead and use eggplant, I'm sorry. We're going to use eggplant slices instead of the ground beef, and we're going to use mushroom slices. So we're going to do pretty much the same thing that we do with the ground beef. We're going to start with the eggplant slices, and we're going to start with about a half a cup of mushrooms that we're going to break up into small pieces just as if it were meat. And that's going to be our basis for our meat portion of it that's going to be non-meat, but that'll give you the same kind of nutrients that using a meat portion would do. And so that's going to be sauteing in the other pan. So we're going to have that sauteing. In both of those, you're going to want to put a tablespoon of garlic into each one of those. Excuse me, you're going to put a teaspoon of garlic into each one of those. I assume that you probably won't be making both, so that would be it. You'd put a teaspoon into it. And go ahead and add your bell peppers that we talked about. Just a little bit of bell peppers. You want to put an eighth of a cup. I have a quarter here, so I'm going to put half in each one. So you're going to put in a quarter. You don't want the bell peppers, chopped bell peppers, to over flavor your food. A lot of people tend to use it a lot because they want to make it spicier. What it really does is just make everything taste like the bell pepper. So you want a teaspoon of salt that we're going to add to each one of these, and a teaspoon of pepper. I use Himalayan pink salt. I like the flavor of it better than regular salt. They say it's better for you, so I'll use a teaspoon of that into each one of those as well. You can find the recipe for both of these on the website that we built for the event. And so we're going to let both of those saute for a moment. let the ground beef cook up, and we will take and that will help saute the onions and soften the onions into it as that cooks. Because you want your meat to be very well cooked at this point. Even though we're going to bake it, you still want your meat cooked before we put it in to the oven and cook your lasagna. So you want to make sure that that's very well cooked, especially if you're using any kind of pork. And then our vegetarian one. You're looking to soften the eggplant and cook that, and then get the mushrooms so they don't look like they look more canned, or what you're used to seeing as canned mushrooms. You can use canned mushrooms. You don't have to use fresh mushrooms. I just prefer to use fresh mushrooms when I do this, but canned mushrooms will work just as well for this part of it if you want to do that. And so that's heating up, and we're browning the eggplant to start with, and giving the onion that's in there the kind of a little bit more of a flavor, and caramelize the onion as well that's in with the eggplant. And caramelizing onion makes a huge difference in your cooking. It gives it a much better flavor. It pulls the onion flavor out into the other foods, so it gives it much more of a flavor to it. So you want to caramelize those onions and that garlic together in with the rest of the vegetables. This is kind of to give you an idea, of what it looks like when the eggplant and mushrooms are caramelizing with those onions. You want the onions to look almost translucent color and be soft, and the eggplant to be brown. So that's what we're looking for there in that one. The same kind of thing with the ground beef. And so this is actually the most difficult part of the whole process, is cooking it, because the rest of lasagna cooking is really just kind of, once you're at this prep stage, is really layering it. So we're going to start with the vegetarian one. This is the sauce that we made yesterday. As Deborah, you might remember, it came out kind of chunky looking. And I prefer it that way on my spaghetti. I like the chunks of tomato and onion when I'm eating it, but you can puree it for about 2 minutes. And when you do that, you end up with this very nice, beautiful, kind of an orange colored sauce that's mixed in it. It's pureed. And this looks more like the spaghetti sauce that you use. You don't need to make the sauce to make this dish. It just makes it better. You can use a jar spaghetti sauce as well. Any of that will do. So I pureed everything up from yesterday, and so that's what we ended up with there. And I also have some in this bowl here. So we're going to start. The key to this is what I call layering. And so you want to end up taking a spoonful, put a nice layer of the spaghetti sauce on the bottom. You want it to cover the bottom for 2 reasons. One of which is to keep the noodles from sticking to the bottom, but also that sauce is what's going to cook your noodles. So you want to put a nice layer of sauce on that. I have 2 kinds of noodles which I use. In this pan in particular, I like using, these are vegetable noodles that I like using for this. You can use that, or you can use the standard lasagna noodles that we're all familiar with, and then just break them down to size. So you're going to want to put a layer in there. So I'm going to start with these vegetarian noodles because I like these the best. And I just put a layer of the noodles to cover the whole bottom. Push those down into the sauce so that it covers both the top and the bottom of the noodles, and that's going to be significant. The next you're going to do is you're going to end up putting a layer of, I put rows, but you can put a layer of zucchini so that it's kind of in a row. And then I'll put a row of yellow squash, another row of zucchini across there, and another row of squash in my pans. And so I'll show you in a second. This is what it looks like when you're done putting your rows and putting your sauce with your first layer of noodles in there. After you've completed your first layer, this is when you'll want to either use the ricotta cheese I talked about, or this is where we take 16-ounce container of cottage cheese, and we're going to add 1 egg to that. We're going to mix that in thoroughly, and that's going to give us, once it's cooked, more of the consistency of the ricotta cheese. You're not going to really notice a whole lot of taste, and it's about 1/3 of the cost of using the ricotta cheese. So this is where we put a layer of this across the top of those vegetables that we just put in there, and smooth that out so it's a nice layer all the way across. Covers the vegetables in this ricotta cheese. Take and put another layer. The whole thing is really in layers. Take another layer of your noodles, stick that on top of there, and make sure you press down into the cheese and the sauce. And again, this is where we go back to the layering again. You start off with another layer of the spaghetti sauce over the top of the noodles. This is key because, again, this is what's going to cook your noodles, is in that sauce as it heats up in the oven. So now you've got another layer. This is where, in this case, we're going to go ahead and take our sauteed brown squash. We're going to put that squash, those onions, those bell peppers, those mushrooms that we have cooked in here, and we're going to put that in our layer in here. That's going to be our substitute meat layer, and I'll show you how to do the meat layer, which is very similar to the same thing. So we're going to put that in there. Again, we have that on there, the meat layer. This is where we start putting in, this is mozzarella cheese. You're going to put in a layer of mozzarella cheese over the top of that meat layer so that it cooks in over the top of that. Put, again, another layer of your noodles across the top of that. So really the whole difficult part of this is really just kind of the prep. The rest of it's really easy. It's just kind of putting it in, putting a layer of noodles, putting a layer of sauce, and then topping that. We'll go ahead and take and put another layer of spaghetti sauce on top of our noodles so that it cooks the top of them. When it cooks, we'll put another layer of mozzarella cheese over the top of this. So that it's nicely covered. You'll then add the Parmesan cheese so that there's a nice layer of Parmesan cheese on top of that. And you're done with your lasagna, in this case, or vegetarian lasagna. So that's the first one. You'll put aluminum foil on that, put it in the oven and bake that, bake it for 50 minutes at 375 in the oven with aluminum foil on top of that. Then take the aluminum foil off, raise the temperature to 425, bake that for another 10 minutes so that it browns the mozzarella cheese and the Parmesan cheese, and the sauce on top gives you that nice crisp coating on the top. And then you can serve it. So it takes about an hour to cook. We're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to do it with our meat. So we've put a layer again of the spaghetti sauce on the bottom. It helps cook the noodles, and it keeps them from sticking. Otherwise, you end up with the noodles sticking to the bottom of it. So we have that nice layer. You can see that we have just a nice layer of that spaghetti sauce on the bottom. This time I'm going to use the regular noodles. These are nice because they fit just long enough in the pan. So you lay a layer of noodles down across the bottom. Break that up a little bit so that it fits. So you have the layer of noodles across the bottom. Again, another layer of that spaghetti sauce across the top of that, which will help cook those noodles. Make sure you press the noodles into the sauce and that they're thoroughly covered with the sauce, because that's going to help cook those noodles. Then again, as we did before, put a row of zucchini, a row of yellow squash across there. Alternate. You can, at this point, if you want, take a handful of mushrooms after you put your rows of zucchini and squash to add, since we're doing this as a meat. If you want to, you can use pretty much anything. You can use spinach to lasagna if you want. I'm not a big spinach fan, but you can add spinach at this point. Basically, you can add some of the eggplant if you like that as well. Any of that will work for the vegetable portion of it. And then I'm just going to break the mushrooms and just liberally sprinkle those over the vegetable section as well in there. And then in this case, I'm going to use the ricotta cheese. But as I said, you can go ahead and use the cottage cheese mixed with the egg. And so you use a 16-ounce package or 2 cups of ricotta cheese or the cottage cheese, and layer that, just smooth that out so it almost looks like frosting over the top of our vegetable section. It looks like you've actually kind of just frosted it, and I'll show you that in a second. So we've just kind of frosted the top of our, so this is what it looks like with the ricotta cheese or the cottage cheese. It's kind of literally put like a frosting across the top of it. Then again, we'll take and we'll put the noodles across the top. Put a layer of noodles. So it's really not difficult once your prep is done. The longest time any of it takes is to really to cut up your vegetables. Again, we just pour sauce over the top of it. This was our sauce from yesterday. Saving some of the sauce for the very top. Put that layer of sauce in, which is going to cook the noodles. You want to put that on top of the noodles so that it cooks the noodles in that. A lot of recipes you will see suggest you cook the noodles first. I find out they end up cooking too much. This way they come out nice and cooked without being overly cooked. So while we've been doing that, our meat has cooked with our onions and our bell pepper in this mixture. And so we will just layer that. I did a combination of ground beef and sausage, but you could do just sausage. You can do just ground beef. And again, we just put that all on top. Spread that out across it so you have a nice layer of meat, and then you will put your final layer. If you don't have these really nice lasagna pans that I got as a set from Costco, if you want to, you can buy aluminum pans. Pretty much at any grocery store, you can find the deep dish kind of aluminum pans. I think they're like $1 a piece. You can get them at the dollar store. And here we've put our final layer of noodles on the top of here. Okay, we have our final layer of noodles. We put our final layer of sauce over the top of that. Make sure that kind of spreads out. So that you cover the noodles. And once you have that final layer of sauce on the top, you cover it in, you want to cover it in your cheese layer, your mozzarella cheese layer. And again, once you've got that final mozzarella cheese layer on top, you sprinkle it with Parmesan cheese to cover the whole top of it. Cover this with aluminum foil. Bake it in the oven at 375 for 50 minutes. Uncover it for the last 10 minutes in the oven. When you are done with that, and the magic of TV, it will look something like this, with the cheese melted on top. The noodles are done and cooked inside. It's a little bit crisp on the edges, as you can see, and I will cut into this so that you can see what that looks like. Now, this is the one I made. It was a vegetarian one. Again, you will have different layers, but this will give you an idea. We're cutting into it. It's really kind of soft. You just kind of want to get through all those layers. Get a plate. There's our spatula. Make sure that's cut around the edges. Well, I didn't get it out quite well. I probably should cut smaller pieces, but it's kind of very cheesy. You have your vegetables. I didn't quite look as nicely as it's supposed to. I should have maybe cut a smaller piece, but you get the idea. The vegetables are nicely cut. You have the vegetables in there, the mushrooms, and it's very cheesy. Are there any questions that anybody has at this point on how to do this? No questions. Okay. Well, thank you for coming and watching how to make lasagna, and I hope you enjoy it. Have a good day.